is Russell, and it is the Fallout from Dishonor podcast. It is Monday, July 19th, and we got a lot of shit to get into. This past weekend, I watched ROH TV as per usual. Along with that, I've got some ROH stuff about the women's tournament for the ROH Women's Championship. Kind of my thoughts on that and how that might be shaping up. Some ROH news, and then the ROH TV review for ROH TV 513, and Smackdown, RAW, and the Money Bank pay-per-view from this past weekend. So, again, there's a shitload of stuff to get into, so we might as well dive in deep. First off, wanted to start by talking about the women's title tournament bracket. So, at the Best in the World pay-per-view, the final brackets for the tournament were released. Apart from what happened on ROH TV with Mandy Leon and Quinn McKay, we'll get into that a little bit later, but the women's title tournament bracket as it stands before that is Sumi versus Rock, Mandy Leon versus Chelsea Green. Chelsea Green took Dita Von Star's place in the tournament after she interfered in the Matt Taven and Dutch match. She was announced at the Best in the World pay-per-view. She returned, or showed up. Max the Impaler versus Holly Dead, Miranda versus Alex Gracia, Matarazzi versus Nicole Savoy, Allison Kay versus Willow Nightingale, and Maribel versus Trish Adora. On top of all that, of course, Angelina Golov gets her first round bye, which, again, I don't necessarily agree with that terminology. She did beat Quinn McKay a while ago. They replayed that match, actually, on Women's Division Wednesday, this past Wednesday, so if you wanted to go check that out, you could. Again, I don't like calling it a first round bye just because it was a victory over Quinn McKay. Now, if they were having this entire tournament in the same night like they used to with the first few King of the Rings in WWF back in the day, then I would call this a first round bye. But just in my opinion, it's not really, just because they're going to be having it over weeks and weeks. I get why they would call it that. Again, I just disagree with it. I've brought that up before. Allie Rex declined her ticket to Gold due to her knee surgery. It was, I believe, the match with Angelina Love that may have done that, and then she had the match after that with Max the Impaler, but I believe it was the first match that did it, so she had to decline her ticket. As far as tournament favorites go, looking at the former ROH Women's Champion history, it's obviously not very long. There weren't many champions in the past. Obviously, if she were there, Kelly Klein would be the favorite, being a 3-time champion, but she, of course, is not in the company. That's what kind of led to this entire tournament, is her basically either leaving or getting fired, depending on who you talk to. It really sounds like ROH let her go after she had not so kind things to say about the company and what she was getting paid to be women's champion. So, just looking at it, the two favorites would obviously be Sumi and Angelina Love, as far as who's in the tournament based on championship history. Looking at all of these women, my overall first pick would probably be Angelina Love. Maybe a little later I'll get into like a secondary pick. It has to do with some stuff that happened on ROH TV this past week. But before we get into all that shit, I was on Fightful.com and read a couple interesting things as far as ROH is concerned. So, originally reported by PostWrestling.com by John Pollock, former WWE and NXT star and former ROH tag champ Chris Hero was reportedly backstage at Ring of Honor Best in the World. It was assumed and later confirmed by Dave Meltzer that Chris Hero was acting as a producer. The ROH COO was quoted on PostWrestling.com saying that Chris was there and is always home at Ring of Honor. Hard to say if he's just going to be in the producer role backstage. I would be very surprised if he didn't at least have a few matches in Ring of Honor. I don't know how much of a regular he may be. Obviously, he hasn't shown up on any pay-per-views or RH TV or even their YouTube shows yet. So all that remains to be seen, but it does appear that he is back with the company. Also reported on Fightful.com. On last Sunday, the day of the ROH Best in the World pay-per-view, it was reported that ROH has actually reached out to multiple recently released WWE superstars. It's reported that some already have deals in place. Obviously, Chelsea Green maybe being one of them. I say maybe just because she returned at the Impact Wrestling pay-per-view this past Saturday, and I'm not sure if she's got a contract signed with Impact and then she's being allowed to wrestle on ROH, or if it's the other way around. Obviously, at the Best in the World pay-per-view, she came out and she's going to be in the tournament, so she's going to be in ROH for at least a few months, maybe. It sounded like she probably wasn't going to start wrestling in the tournament for at least a month or so, given what it's going to take for her arm to heal. But she was also in the mixed tag team match on Impact, the pay-per-view. Obviously, it being a mixed tag, she didn't have to do a whole lot, so we'll see how that develops. Anyway, ROH has been in touch with some of the recently released WWE women, in particular, I guess, to help build up their women's division. So I've got a list here of interesting notables as far as that might be concerned. WWE released on April 15th Peyton Royce and Billie Kay. It'll be interesting to see. I could see either one of them or maybe both of them showing up in ROH. Maybe they'll be a tag team, a group, whatever, but obviously they'll be having one-on-one matches primarily, as we don't have a women's tag team division in ROH. And I want to be perfectly clear, bringing that up, ROH does not need women's tag team titles. I don't even think WWE needs women's tag team titles, and certainly not WWE NXT. I thought bringing in the women's tag titles, having one set of women's tag team titles floating between all three brands would have been perfectly fine. But apparently WWE disagreed. Anyway, moving on. On May 19th, WWE released Jessamine Duke, Vanessa Bourne, and Skylar Story. Nothing. I mean, I suppose I could see them picking up Vanessa Bourne. Skylar Story, I don't know enough about her really to make that call one way or the other. I don't even think she showed up on NXT TV. If she did, it was nothing that I ever saw or that made any headlines that I may have read in the last few months. Jessamine Duke is an interesting one, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if she doesn't show up back anywhere as far as wrestling goes. WWE brought her in, it seemed, for that Four Horsewomen storyline, but nothing ever materialized from that. June 2nd, Ruby Riott, Lana, and Santana Garrett were released. Interesting notable as far as that go is Ruby Riott. I think a lot of people are assuming that she will show up on AEW, and that's definitely a possibility. But I don't know if I agree with that. I would like to see Ruby Riott in Ring of Honor. I think she would be given a chance to shine a little bit better in there. AEW, especially their women's division, is kind of schizophrenic with who they focused on and whatnot. Obviously, Britt Baker is their women's champ at the moment, so they've actually done a pretty good job of focusing on that. But before that, even with their champions, it seemed like they did a weird job of who they were focusing on. Two people that were released from their men's division, notables in my opinion. I believe they were both released on, Buddy Murphy was released on June 2nd, and I think he might be an interesting one to watch. I think he could show up in ROH TV. Another name, however unlikely this may be, Daniel Bryan Danielson, whatever the hell you want to call him, the Dragon. So it would be wise to assume that he's probably going to show back up in WWE at some point, and that's definitely a fair assumption. Pretending for a minute, if he weren't going to show up there and he was going to sign with anyone else, I think it would make the most sense if he went back to Ring of Honor, just because he's been there, he's had a home there, and ROH would be fairly likely to let him wrestle some indie dates. They have a previous relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Obviously, AEW appears to have a similar relationship. So I suppose it's possible he could show up in AEW. But I think the most likely place, if he wasn't going to sign back with WWE, would be ROH. Just my opinion. So, getting into the TV that I watched over the weekend, ROH TV episode 513 started out, don't want to call it a recap, but there was a promo. John Gresham's leg is in fact hurt, and he couldn't compete for the night. Brian Johnson did the recap since Quinn McKay be wrestling that night, or pretending to be a wrestler, as he put it. I thought Brian cut a great promo, recap, whatever the hell you want to call it, in the opening. Basically pissing on everyone who's not him, except, of course, The Allure. First match, right out of the gate, Fred Yehi versus Ray Horace. This was set up kind of as maybe Fred Yehi would be the underdog just because he's used to wrestling in pure wrestling matches, and that's not what this was at all. Obviously, it was just regular wrestling match rules. It didn't seem like he treated it much different than he would any other match. Basically wrestled as if it was a pure wrestling match with a lot of submission holds and whatnot. Ray Horace would end up picking up the victory in that one. Moving on to the next match. I believe I brought it up earlier. On Women's Division Wednesday, they did replay the Angelina Love versus Quinn McKay match. Obviously, up next was the Mandy Leone and Quinn McKay match. They played a couple promos before the match started. Most notably, in Quinn's promo at the end, she was basically asking Mandy for a fair fight. That would come into play later. At the beginning of the match, the Code of Honor was adhered to, sort of. They shook hands. Mandy Leone pulled her and Quinn McKay in, and I believe immediately clotheslined her. Quinn fought from underneath, at least mostly at the beginning of the match, and then there'd be a lot of back and forth. Notable thing, Angelina Love would actually get involved in the match 3 times. Once when Quinn McKay was backtracked over the top turnbuckle and the referee was distracted by Mandy, Angelina would pull her feet from out underneath her. Quinn would smack her face on the ring apron. At the end of the match, Quinn would have the Tangerine Dream locked in and Mandy would tap out, but Angelina would have the ref distracted, and then right at the end of the match, Angelina passed set of brass knucks to Mandy, and Mandy would use them to pick up the pinfall. Interesting note, after the match was over, Maria Kanellis was on commentary, as she is with a lot of these women's division matches. She pointed out that the ref could only call what he saw, but Maria was on the board and she could do something about this. Sounds like Quinn might be in the tournament. So if Quinn had won this match, they didn't make it super clear whether Quinn would be taking Mandy's spot or if she would just be in the tournament. If Quinn McKay does end up in the tournament and doesn't take anyone else's spot, going back and looking at the bracket, we have an even set of 14 women, not including Angelina Love. So I'm not really sure. With Angelina Love having the first round bye, I'm not sure where Quinn McKay would fit in if they did add her. Apart from, of course, there would have to be at least one other woman added, which would kind of make sense, because if you count Angelina as one match onto herself, I believe there's 15, so at least one more match would make things a little more even as far as the bracket goes. After the Mandy Leone Quinn McKay match, we did have a third match, a little uncharacteristic, although this is the second ROH TV where that would happen. I believe it happened at last week's as well. We got the Foundation and Joe Keys versus the Shane Taylor production, the 8-man tag team match. Not super familiar with Joe Keys. I thought he did very well. A lot more offense at the beginning of the match, and actually all the way through the match, than I actually thought that he would get. A great showing by him. After he would tag out, Jay Lethal got dominated early. Notable stuff. Keys would actually get a near fall with Rhett Titus super kicking Morris, I believe it was, and the German suplex combo. Sorry. Joe Keys would take a spine buster from O'Shea for the pinfall, so I kind of expected that he would take the pinfall, but it was a really good match. I definitely suggest, as always, that you go back and watch this last episode of ROH TV. Now, announcements that have been made. We are getting ROH Glory by Honor from the Philadelphia 2300 Arena. Night 1, August 20th. So far, it's been announced that Bandito will, in his first championship title defense, unless something changes between now and then, will defend the title against Flip Gordon. And the only 2 matches announced for night 2 so far are Matt Taven versus Vincent in the steel cage match. Taven, as it would appear, will be leaving ROH afterwards regardless, and Taven's return title match is on the line. Kind of weird conflicting stipulations. I guess if Vincent wins, he gets the championship match, and then if Taven is leaving anyway, maybe he gets his return title match before he leaves. I'm not really sure how the hell that's going to work out. Kind of weird and unclear. Maybe more will be made a little bit clearer before Glory by Honor comes up. Second match announced for night 2, Bandito and Ray Horace versus Rush and Dragon Lee. That should be a really good tag team match. So that's all the ROH news I have. So getting into SmackDown notes. I'm just going to run through things real fast. Again, don't take super long notes during any of this. If you want total recaps of every single match from pay-per-views or anything like that, I guess I'm not the podcast to listen to. But 3 real quick things from SmackDown that I thought were notable. Shotzi Blackheart and Tegan Nox did defeat the tag team champions, Natalya and Tamina. Bianca Belair did beat Carmella via pinfall, but if you missed it, I guess no worries, because they're doing another match this Friday's SmackDown. So, typical WWE having a match, having a feud, and then rematching the goddamn thing to death. And then after the main event, Seth Rollins would climb the ladder and grab the briefcase, kind of symbolizing that he would end up winning Money in the Bank, which we will get into right now. Money in the Bank recap. Pre-show, the Usos versus the Mysterios. Now, if you listen to the show from this past Saturday, I did a predictions for all of this Money in the Bank stuff. I did call the Usos winning this. I know a lot of people were disagreeing with me and calling it for the Mysterios as far as repercussions from Jimmy getting arrested. Again, if you thought that was going to be the case, when it comes to WWE, you guys haven't been fucking paying attention, in my opinion. It's WWE. I know that they've got the wellness policy and they like to look like they're, on top of shit and whatnot with the drug testing. Every time someone gets a DUI, they keep releasing statements that whoever the hell it is, Jeff Hardy, Jimmy Uso, whoever is responsible for their own actions, obviously With this arrest, we didn't even get that. It seemed to me like they were just completely ignoring it. Some people thought they weren't putting out a statement because they would end up punishing Jimmy. It definitely doesn't seem like that's what's going on at all. As far as whatever rehabilitation he may or may not be going through, unless it's an outpatient rehab, obviously that doesn't seem to be happening. After the pre-show concluded, we got the women's Money in the Bank match. Asuka versus Naomi versus Alexa versus Nikki Cross or Ash, whatever you would prefer, versus Liv Morgan versus Selena Vega versus Natalya versus Tamina. So the main highlights from this would involve Alexa. As far as she was the first to enter, and then she would stand on the middle rope for everyone's entrances after that, obviously playing up her creepy character. She would try to use her powers to get down the briefcase, which she seemed like the crowd favored throughout the entire match. This was the one case where the crowd just kind of looked back and was silent when it came to Alexa. So I don't think this magical powers wizard shit that they were leaning on so heavy during the COVID era, whatever the hell you want to call it. I just don't think that shit's gonna get over. After they don't need to be doing that stuff anymore. And then there was a mind control spot with Selena Vega. I thought it was kind of stupid, but the crowd actually seemed to respond. Nikki Cross, Nikki Ash, whatever the hell you would call her, would end up getting the victory in a very interesting spot where everyone was on the top of the ladder, minus Alexa Bliss, who was buried underneath a bunch of ladders. Nikki would scale the ladder and pull down the briefcase while everyone else was fighting. Asuka was in a little bit of an awkward spot where she was kind of looking at Nikki and sort of kind of reaching after, but didn't. It was really weird. If you watch it back or you watch the pay-per-view at all, you'll see what I'm talking about. It was a little odd, but you do what you have to. Next up, the Raw Men's Tag Team Championship saw AJ and Almost versus the Viking Raiders. Not a lot to really talk about in this match. Like I had said during my predictions, I was pretty sure that AJ and Almost would successfully defend, which is exactly what happened. The Viking Raiders, I know they're former Raw champions. They've been pretty dismissible since being called up from NXT, so I really didn't expect much out of them. Next up, we had Bobby Lashley versus Kofi Kingston. I guess there's not a ton to talk about with this match. Bobby Lashley did successfully defend the championship. Bobby Lashley dominated this entire match. It actually reminded me a lot of the Cena versus Lesnar match from SummerSlam 2014, where Lesnar just beat the hell out of Cena. That's basically what we got in this match. Again, Bobby successfully defended his championship. Next up, we had the Raw Women's Championship. Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair. Oh, the last match. Again, prediction, got it right with Bobby Lashley. This next one, Charlotte would work over the knee of Rhea Ripley that she previously injured in the last Monday Night Raw or two, although Rhea didn't sell the injury at all until about halfway through the match. Also, fuck you, Peacock. You do a terrible job of censoring things. Charlotte Flair would flip off the crowd and Peacock would kind of sort of censor it, but you saw it at the beginning of the right before the blackout, and then right afterwards. It was kind of strange, but whatever. I've got more Peacock shit to get into here in a second, where I'm not really very pleased with them, and never have been actually. Charlotte Flair would win the match via submission with the figure eight. I did not end up calling that match right, of course. I called it for Rhea Ripley. So, next up, the men's Money in the Bank match. So, to give you a little bit of backstory with this, I did not watch most of the pay-per-view on Sunday night. I had band practice. If you've listened to any of the other previous podcasts, you'd know that I play in a punk band. Had band practice for a few hours, and then went to the store and got a few things, and then would come home. And that's when I decided to try to turn Peacock on. Now, luckily for me, we get Peacock for free. We've got Xfinity. Had I been one of the many people that pay for this fucking hunk of shit, I would have been fucking pissed. So I got home after band practice, got food together and ate, and then sat down to try to watch this. And the first match that was up, I believe there was a promo or two beforehand. Couldn't really fucking see, because as soon as I turned it on, the screen is just non-stop blacking out, cutting in and out. Now, I did go back and watch the pay-per-view today in its entirety, so I do have a few notes, but one of the main notes I've got men's Money in the Bank written here, and then fuck you, Peacock, written in big bold letters, so fuck you, Peacock. Anyway, the men's Money in the Bank match was Ricochet versus Morrison versus Matt Riddle. Again, I'll never fucking call him Riddle. Versus Drew McIntyre, Big E, and Kevin Owens, and Shinsuke, and Seth Rollins. I thought that Ricochet shined really well in this match, had a few different high spots he had in the match. The first one, I thought, being where Ricochet dived over Matt Riddle onto John Morrison, and then right after that, Riddle would dive onto Seth Rollins. There was also a spot where Drew tossed Ricochet over the top rope, I believe in some type of sidewalk slam looking move. And then he got hurtled over into a ladder later, I also believe, by Drew McIntyre, if I'm not mistaken. Jinder Mahal and his lackeys saw to it that Drew didn't win, which I was kind of thrilled about. I was kind of a little bit afraid that they would go in that direction. Thankfully, they didn't. Ricochet would scale the top rope and jump onto the ladder when Riddle was on it. Again, another impressive spot by Ricochet. I thought he shined the best throughout this match. I really wish that WWE would do more with him. I know his high-flying stuff is very impressive, but he's only got so many years where he'll be able to do that kind of shit in peak condition, so WWE needs to do something with him. Rollins and Morrison would work together through a big portion of the match until Rollins basically turned his back on John Morrison and hit him with a ladder. Big E would end up getting the briefcase, which, again, I called that, which would bring us to Roman Reigns versus Edge. Now, when I originally watched this, I believe this, if not a little bit before this, was when Peacock finally started working right again. We would get the Universal Championship match, Roman Reigns versus Edge. Couple highlights from this. Edge, obviously, would get to lock in the crossface with the bar from the chair after Roman Reigns would end up getting the chair and breaking up the bar. Usos would try to interfere. The Mysterios, of course, stopped it, playing into when the Usos beat the Mysterios earlier in the night. Rollins would end up costing Edge the match. First coming in with a super kick to break up the crossface, and then a distraction for Roman to hit a spear, and that was it for the match. Right after the match was over, John Cena would return to a gigantic ass pop, and he would cut a promo that more or less we're getting Cena versus Reigns at SummerSlam, as it was kind of sort of broken a few months ago. So that's your Money in the Bank recap. Moving on, we got Raw. Now, this is going to be a little bit more of a Cliff Notes version, kind of like with the Smackdown recap. Monday Night Raw, it was long, as it always is. I unfortunately did not make it through the whole thing. Cena did his return promo, which is the main reason I actually decided to watch Monday Night Raw this past Monday. We got the typical cheesy Cena bullshit, which was actually kind of entertaining. You know, he hasn't been around. He's been making movies in Hollywood. You leave the company, the heart ends up growing fonder, so he comes back, and a lot of people end up enjoying it, which I kind of did too. Cena would announce, basically, after his cheesy promo, John Cena bullshit stuff, he's coming to SmackDown this Friday. No real surprise there, since that's Roman Reigns' home. And again, it was pretty much confirmed the night before that we're going to be getting Roman Reigns versus John Cena. After the Cena promo, some other stuff happens. It was pretty non-consequential. I fell asleep at one point and then woke up to a kind of a surprise on my screen when I woke up in the middle of Keith Lee versus Bobby Lashley. It was announced earlier in the show that Lashley would have an open challenge for his championship. Obviously, that's what this was. What I saw of the match, which was maybe the last 5 minutes, was pretty good. Was surprised to see Keith Lee, especially since I woke up in the middle of the match. Very glad that he's back. Thought it was a little strange that his first match back, he would come in to challenge Lashley and end up losing. But that kind of is what it is. After the match, after Lashley won, we got Goldberg's big return, which was actually reported by, I believe, Fightful.com last week. They had said that Goldberg was coming in, and I believe they even said that he would be challenging Lashley, for the WWE Championship. As with a lot of people, I can't say I was super thrilled about this news. I was kind of hoping it wasn't going to be true, but it is what it is. It's WWE. Given the rumors I've read online, it kind of sounds like they were trying to get Brock Lesnar for this spot, which is a match that Lashley versus Brock Lesnar is something I would be super into. People have been talking about that potential match going back years, with Lashley doing MMA and actually getting a better win-loss record than Brock Lesnar has. Obviously, Lashley improved tremendously when he had his Impact Wrestling or TNA run. I don't know what the hell they were calling it themselves when he ran through there and was actually doing the MVP manager stuff that he's doing now in WWE. I would have loved to see that, but that's obviously not what we're fucking getting. So, whatever. One thing I don't have in my notes here. Karrion Kross would make his Monday Night Raw debut, still being NXT champion, against Jeff Hardy. Two big notes with there. Charlotte Flair, his manager, Scarlett, was not there. So that kind of takes away his entrance. And then he ends up losing his debut to Jeff Hardy. Grant you, Jeff Hardy had his foot on the ropes. That was kind of surprising that Jeff would end up winning that. So I don't know what they're doing with Karrion Kross. I'm sure a lot of people don't know what the hell they're doing with Karrion Kross after this. So earlier in the night, Rhea Ripley interrupted Charlotte Flair's women's championship coronation and would get a championship rematch later, per announced by Adam Pearce and Sonya Deville. Rhea did end up winning, but it was by disqualification after Flair hit her in the face with a title after Flair was trying to leave. So Rhea ended up laying out Charlotte Flair, and then hold on. Oh, sorry about that. The Money in the Bank briefcase would end up being cashed in, and we would get a new women's champion, which I thought was kind of weird, but congratulations to Nikki Cross or Nikki Ash or whatever the hell you want to call her. I think the Nikki Ash name is kind of weird, almost superhero. I think the gimmick is a little bit strange, but people seem pretty happy when she cashed in and won the match. I'm willing to give this a chance. It screams to me some weird cross between the Hurricane and John Cena. I don't particularly care for it, but it is what it is. I'm really happy for Nikki Cross. Since she's been called from NXT, they haven't really done a ton with her. There was the stuff with Alexa Bliss, and then Alexa would turn on Nikki, and they've basically done nothing with her since then. She didn't get any championship reigns in NXT, but at least they were using her. And I thought really well. She played up the crazy character really well. I was actually hoping they would do something with her and that character. That's not what's happened. That's not what we're getting. Supposedly, it's actually Nikki Cross's idea. This whole gimmick. That's what we've been led to believe in some of the dirt sheets and whatnot. It is what it is. Again, don't like the gimmick. Super happy for her. That is basically what I've got for the podcast. Sorry to kind of leave you guys on a cliffhanger after that. This podcast is already going a little long, at least as far as my podcasts usually go. So, this is another one in the books. This is me, Russell, signing off. And I will get back to you all guys next week. I will be doing the review of ROH TV, episode 514, I believe it is. And I may watch Smackdown this Friday. If I do, it won't end up being till Saturday, which I try to record the podcast after ROH TV on Saturday night. That didn't really happen this weekend because there was Money in the Bank, and then after Money in the Bank, with John Cena's return, I decided to try to give Monday Night Raw a chance and watched as much as I could of it before falling asleep and kind of fucking around on my phone. It's really difficult to watch a 3-hour product. No surprise there. So, that's the podcast for this week. I thank you guys for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys next week.